Hello, thank you for joining us for this round of breakout sessions today. My name is Gabrielle Merkin, and I am a researcher at the American Institutes for Research, where I work on the NAEP Assessment Operations team, primarily supporting the NAEP Reading Assessment and NAEP Digital Platform development. Before I introduce our presenter, I would like to let you know that I will be moderating a question and answer session after the presentation. We will take questions from the chat space, so please type your questions in the chat as they arise. I would also like to note that any resources provided for this session are available in the website resource files. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Dianna Townsend as our presenter today. Dr. Townsend is Professor of Literacy Studies at the University of Nevada, Reno, where she also serves as the Graduate Program Director of Master's and Certificate Programs in Literacy. Her research centers on the academic language development of adolescent students, with specific attention to vocabulary, comprehension, and disciplinary literacy. She examines both the unique academic language demands of the disciplines, as well as effective instructional strategies to help students understand and use academic language in and across academic disciplines. Nationally, Dr. Townsend serves as a principal member of the Education Research Scientific Review Panel with IES and is a member of the NAEP Reading Standing Committee. Today, Dr. Townsend will present her work on vocabulary and language development for middle and high school students. This presentation has been pre-recorded, but I will join you again live to moderate the question and answer session at the conclusion of the presentation. With that said, I will turn the session over to Dr. Townsend.
Hello, I'm Dr. Dianna Townsend, and I'm really glad to be here with you today. We'll be exploring some really important ideas related to vocabulary and language development for middle and high school students. And if you look at the word cloud here to the right of the screen, you'll see all sorts of interesting words. This list came from a group of teachers I worked with here in Reno, Nevada. Before we worked together, I asked them to send me important words that were coming up in their next couple of weeks of lessons, and this is what they sent. So it's just a really clear illustration of the pretty intense academic language demands that our secondary students face in their middle school and high school classrooms. Just one clarification, vocabulary versus language. We're going to really focus on academic vocabulary. That's one component of academic language. So academic language is a broad register or variety of a language, and it captures all of the different language features that go into a language. So it can include things like sentence and paragraph structure, text structure, ways of communicating in specific ways to specific audiences, thinking about tone and all sorts of different language features. So we're really honing in on academic language at the word level with a focus on academic vocabulary. The four big questions we'll be exploring in this talk are: why is academic vocabulary so important for adolescent readers? Also, what are the different types and features of academic words, and what's the role of morphology? Spoiler alert, it's a big role. The third question is, what do we know when we have deep ownership of a word? So what does it really mean to know a word? And then finally, what are some powerful instructional routines for learning academic words? I'll share a couple of instructional routines with the other questions as well, and then we'll finish off with a few more. So why is academic vocabulary so important for adolescent readers? Well, let's start with this question. What percentage of words in a text do you need to know for comprehension to occur? And we're really thinking about academic settings and academic texts here. So if you look at the choices, anywhere from 80 to 99%, where would you place, what would you choose as the percentage of words in a text we would need to know? And the answer is actually 98% when we're talking about academic texts. More word knowledge equals better comprehension. So as word knowledge goes up, so does comprehension. But to get to about 60% of comprehension, to comprehend about 60% of the text, students need to know about 98% of the words in those texts. Norbert Schmidt, a leading vocabulary researcher, and his colleagues found this out with hundreds of students about 10 years ago. One important caveat: vocabulary is critical. There's no doubt about it, and that's what we're talking about today. But it's important to acknowledge that it's a necessary but insufficient condition for comprehension to occur. Bill Nagy, another leading vocabulary researcher, has been known to say this. And there's a lot more going on with making meaning from a text than just knowing what the words mean. But knowing the words is pretty critical. So thinking about how important words are, let's dig in now a little bit to the types and features of academic words that we encounter and our students encounter with a close look at morphology. Before I kind of dig into this with you, I just want to share an instructional routine. So if we had more time to explore some of this together, I would probably give you this pre-post self-assessment. If we were going to do a deep dive into units of language and types of academic vocabulary words, I would want to know up front what you think you know about the really key terms that we would be exploring. So the left-hand column has all sorts of keywords for exploring how words work. And then you can see you could rate your knowledge from, oh, I could definitely explain this, over to, not so sure what that means. And then there's a place for notes for you to document your learning as we work through different learning activities. This is a great tool, a great learning tool for all of us, and especially for our adolescents, because as we embark on some learning activities, we've already primed students' attention to really central concepts that we want them to walk away with some ownership of. So if you are engaging in this learning, or a student is, and are doing some reading or listening to a lecture and hear the word phoneme, oh, wait, that was one of the words I was paying attention to early on. This is something I should pay attention to in my learning. And so it really helps students attend to the most important concepts as they work through learning activities. Something like this can also be placed into a vocabulary journal where students across multiple learning experiences or multiple units can go back and add more information, documenting that deepening knowledge. So let's think now, what are some of the types of academic words? There's different taxonomies, categories of academic words, but I'm going to share the three with you that are highly relevant across all disciplines. General academic words like structure, function, and analyze. These are used across all content areas, primarily in academic settings. Then we get to our discipline-specific academic words. These are words like cytoplasm, rhombus, iambic pentameter. These are used specifically in one, maybe two disciplines, but again, in academic settings. And then finally, connectives. Connectives are words like therefore, in addition, and however. These are words that signal a particular relationship between two ideas. And so they connect ideas, showing relationships between them, and they're really important for comprehension. Features of academic words. So when we're talking about these words, what are some things we can use to describe them? Often our academic words are abstract and or technical. They're also often morphologically complex. That means they have multiple morphemes or meaningful parts of words like roots and affixes. So a lot of the words that we encounter in academic texts have multiple meaning parts within each one. We also see in academic words polysemy, or words that are polysemous. Words that are polysemous have multiple meanings. And you can see that right in the word polysemous. Poly means many. The root sem, seem, has to do with meaning, so multiple meaning words. Why does morphology matter? We're really going to kind of hang out here for a minute or two because this is an under-leveraged set of tools that our adolescents could really benefit from. 60 to 75% of the words that students encounter are comprised of Latin and Greek roots and affixes, or morphemes, meaningful word parts. And this is true in science for about 90% of the words that students will encounter. So about 90% of the words students encounter in science are comprised of Latin and Greek roots and affixes. And so you can imagine that building knowledge of these meaningful word parts increases access to lots of other words that also have these word parts. One other important percentage about morphology is that about 75% of words that are comprised of roots and affixes actually do mean what their word parts suggest. So occasionally we come across a word that over time and usage has kind of shifted away a little bit from the meaning of the individual word parts, like the word awful, right? Awful, the word parts should suggest that it means full of awe, but it's taken on a negative connotation over the years. That's only true for about 25% of the words. The other 75% of the words actually mean what their word parts suggest they mean. Morphology also matters because it predicts reading comprehension above and beyond other kinds of language knowledge. So when students know a lot about morphemes on top of knowing a lot about words in general, that actually predicts a better reading comprehension. Also, and this is the crux, this is why it's so important and an under-leveraged tool. Morphological instruction, the research suggests, may help our readers most in need of support, more so than our typically developing readers. So those readers that have histories of reading difficulty might benefit even more from their typically developing readers or peers when there's good morphology instruction in place. So potentially we could close the gap a little bit by implementing really good morphology instruction in our secondary schools. Just in case you're not buying what I'm selling, I'm going to give you one more example here. So this is an item from the U.S. History test in Ohio for grade 8. So you can see the question here asking about 3 social movements after World War I. If we go through this item and identify all the words that have multiple morphemes or meaningful word parts, we get most of the words. So these words really are in front of students all the time. And the more we can help them work with the word parts, the more access we give them to more words. So what should we know about language to leverage morphology for adolescent readers? There's a lot to learn about how language works and how word level reading works. And that's kind of beyond the scope of the time we have today. So really briefly, I want to make an important distinction for you. The 2 most basic units of language that we think about when we're helping students learn how to read are phonemes and graphemes. These are the distinct sounds in a language and the letters or groups of letters that map onto individual sounds. So when we're helping kids learn how to decode, we're thinking about phoneme-grapheme correspondence. Now, once we get into the middle school and high school, we're thinking a lot about fluency and comprehension and vocabulary. And to that end, we want to think about an important distinction between syllables and morphemes. So what's a syllable? A syllable is a discrete chunk of a word we produce in speech that has one vowel sound, but doesn't necessarily carry any meaning. So I don't have to look at any print to work with syllables. I can close my eyes, syllable, and clap it out. I've got 3 discrete chunks of the word. Each one has a vowel sound. None of those word parts mean a whole lot. Those are my syllables. In contrast, morphemes are the smallest unit of language that have both sound and meaning. And so with morphemes, we're thinking about separating out words into parts where each part carries meaning that contributes to the whole word. Now, you might be wondering, this is getting kind of technical. Why are you telling me this? And what I want you to see is an example of how, if we're thinking about syllables and the sound breaking points, we might be missing some important meaning that the morphemes could be giving us. So this is just a set of words from a biography of on Alexander Hamilton, and with some of these words divided up into morphemes and syllables. So if you look at the word disagreed, go over to the syllables column first. Disagreed. Okay, I've got my syllables. Now, if I look at the syllables, I see the word greed. And that could be a little misleading to me because disagreed really doesn't have anything to do with being greedy. I need to think about morphemes. Where are the meaning breaks? Dis is a prefix. Agree is my root. Ed is my suffix. And then I get the meaningful word parts that help me understand the word disagreed. Same thing with revolutionary. If we go to syllables, we lose that really important root volute, which means to turn or go around. With secluded and secretary, which actually originate from the same root, we lose that important root of secret. Same thing with treasury. So by focusing on morphemes, meaningful word parts, we can give students access to a lot of words. Okay, so what do I do if I find a good word and I think, okay, great, I'm going to think about morphemes, but let's say I'm brand new at this and I'm not quite sure how to even help my students start thinking about it. So this word prohibition comes from that item from the Ohio State test. The first thing I do, and I still do this all the time, is I go to Edym Online, which is an online dictionary for etymology. And if you're looking at the histories of words, you're often looking at the morphemes, the meaningful word parts. And what I learned from Edym Online is that pro is a prefix that means forth or before or in front of. Hibit comes from habere, the Latin habere, which means to hold. And ion or un is a suffix that indicates a noun. So prohibition literally was an initiative that held alcohol in front of or away from people. So I can use the word parts to understand this important discipline-specific word better than I might have otherwise. However, I can get access to a lot of other words. So as a teacher who's kind of new at playing with this, what would I do? Well, I go to something called thefreedictionary.com and I search for words containing whatever root I'm curious about to find out, what other words have that? So I did that. I searched for words containing hibit and I got all of these great words. So inhibit means to hold in, uninhibited means not to hold in, exhibit means to hold out. An exhibition is where you hold things out. So I can help my students think about all of these words with this root hibit just by taking a little time to explore prohibition. If I want to get my students practicing with multiple morphemes at once, I might consider doing this instructional routine, which is morpheme sorting or matching. So this is an example from math. In the left-hand column, I have some meaningful morphemes that are likely to show up pretty regularly in math, especially in geometry. The second column has the meaning of the morpheme. And then the third and fourth columns have examples of words that use the morpheme. So I might cut these up and have students sort them by themselves or in pairs. I might give everybody in my class one of these and have them walk around and find their group. What words go with which morpheme, go with which meaning. When I have students sort or match, I do want to make sure I have them sit and do some additional processing and problem solving with the word part. So I might have them find other words that have the word part. I might ask them to explain how a word part plays out in two different words. I might have them teach another team about what the word parts mean and how they show up. I might ask them to connect them back to math, whatever problem solving we're doing. So I want to make sure I give them some opportunities to practice and process those words. Okay, that brings us to question 3. What do we know when we have deep ownership of a word? And the iceberg kind of says it all. We can have tip of the iceberg knowledge or deep iceberg knowledge. And so when we have that deep iceberg knowledge, what's really going on? Well, here's a more academic way to kind of represent the iceberg. It's a continuum of more shallow to more deep knowledge. And you'll notice the words here, receptive and productive. Receptive knowledge of language is knowledge that you can understand when you receive it. Receptive, receive. So if you are listening or reading, you are receiving the language, and if you can understand it, you have receptive knowledge. Productive knowledge is when you have enough knowledge of the language that you can produce it yourself in speech or in writing. So initially, the tip of the iceberg knowledge is that number 1, developing receptive knowledge, where I can sometimes recognize that word when I hear or read it. And then we get to accurate receptive knowledge, which is, yeah, I can understand that word when I hear it or read it. It's not really going to mess up my comprehension. Then we get to developing productive knowledge where, oh yeah, I can kind of pull that word out of my own mind and use it when I want, but I might be using but confusing it, as Donald Bear and Marcia Invernizzi will say. Then we get to accurate productive knowledge where, yep, I can use it, but only in kind of a couple of constrained contexts. Finally, deep iceberg knowledge is deep ownership of the concept knowledge. I can use that word accurately in many different contexts. When we have deep iceberg knowledge, this is the stuff we know. So when we have deep iceberg knowledge, we know the meanings and multiple meanings. We know the sound, the spelling, the grammatical function or structure of it. We know roots and affixes. If we're multilingual, we know cognates, words that sound and look the same in different languages. And we know how to use it in different contexts. So we know a lot about a word when we have deep iceberg knowledge of it. This might be raising a question. Well, that's great, but I have a lot of words that I want my students to build deep knowledge of. How do I pick the ones to focus on? And that's really an important question. And it's something that all of us educators are thinking about all the time. There's so many words, which ones do I pick? This is a little kind of heuristic I use in my own instruction and then when I'm supporting teachers as well. So the first thing we want to ask ourselves are, who are our students? So what are they coming to the table with in terms of introductory knowledge of a topic or deeper knowledge of a topic? That can send me into deeper knowledge with more words if that background knowledge is there. Really importantly, I want to ask myself the question, what's my objective? What do I want my students walking out the door being able to do that they couldn't do when they walked in? And then what key terms do they really need to have ownership of to meet that objective? So I might have a list of 40 words that seem important for a topic or a unit, But when I think about kind of what are the big takeaways from this unit that I want my students to have, I could probably cull that list down a little bit. Another way to think about prioritizing words is how deeply do I want my students to develop knowledge of the important words? So let's say I get my list of 40 key terms down to 25 key terms. That's still a lot of key terms for students to develop deep ownership of. So what I might start thinking about is, okay, which words are most essential for the objective? Those are the deep iceberg words. We're going to get lots of opportunities to practice with those. The other words we'll do some peripheral practice with, occasional practice, some exposures, but not as deeply as the most important words. Often we kind of select a list of 20 or 30 important words and we have students practice with them. And the message that sends to students is all of these words are equal in importance. You should learn them all to great depth and they're all very important. That might be true, but it's going to be really hard for students to build that deep iceberg knowledge of that many words. So by helping them prioritize, we can be successful in helping them build that deep knowledge. And then everything else might be more receptive knowledge that they're leaving us with. Okay, so that brings us to some powerful instructional routines for learning academic words. So I shared the pre and post self-assessment, and I shared the morphology, sorts, and matching, and I'm going to share a few more now. But what I want to kind of put out there for us first is what should be informing our choice of instructional routines. Decades of research have taught us what works with vocabulary instruction. And this isn't just correlational. Correlational would say, well, more vocab equals better comprehension and vice versa. This all comes from actual intervention studies where teachers and researchers studied the impact of these principles of instruction and found that they actually led to gains in things like comprehension, writing, and discussion. So we need to make sure students have multiple exposures to words in multiple contexts with engaging direct instruction. We really want to make sure that students are getting good, clear, explicit instruction from us on words, and that they're also getting lots of exposures and lots of contexts. As part of all that, we need to make sure students have opportunities to practice and personalize word meanings. We want to build word consciousness. That's this curiosity, awareness of interest in words. And we can do that by looking at things like polysemy and morphology. We want to make sure we facilitate rich classroom discussions, that students have a lot of opportunities to practice listening to and using words. And then finally, we want to teach independent word learning strategies. And that's things like context clues, dictionary tools, and also morphology. So here's an example of another instructional routine that kind of maps onto those principles of really good vocabulary instruction. If I want to build some deep iceberg knowledge of some words, I'm probably going to have my students make concept maps of them. And I'll have them put the key term in the middle, and then the bubbles all around really can be anything that suits whatever my disciplinary learning objective is. Often I'm going to want to have students think about the definition or descriptive information, parts of speech, and morphologically related words, the relation to the topic being studied. I want my students to think in multiple modes, and so I'll have them sketch or find a picture that illustrates the word. Think about personal connections and also translations, especially for my multilingual learners. What's neat about this is it can be placed into a vocabulary journal. And as the students hear this word in the next unit or the next unit, they can go back and add to the concept map. And so it becomes a representation of their developing and deepening knowledge of a really important concept. Another instructional routine, although this is a little bit more of a classroom resource than an instructional routine, are active word walls. We often think of word walls as kind of an elementary thing, but hopefully this one, which is just super cool, will give you a sense of how well they can be used in secondary classrooms. This was designed by a teacher in New York City named Annie Kell. She was teaching newcomers middle school social studies. And so at the top of her word wall, she has what she calls anywhere words. Those are general academic words. And you can see there's places for her and the students to add more words as they come across them. She then organized all the discipline-specific words around her essential question, her EQ. And she has this main word in the middle, consequences. That's going to show up all year long. So she kind of has that front and center. Then the big concepts for this unit that she wants students to really build deep ownership of are industrialization, immigration, big business, and the progressive era. all the words that go along with those key concepts. Maybe she's hoping for that receptive, maybe some accurate receptive knowledge, but not necessarily kind of that deep productive knowledge. So she has taken the word wall and organized it exactly how she wants her students to organize their knowledge. And her students used the word wall all the time in their discussions, their writing, their reading to start to remember and deepen their knowledge of how these important ideas related to each other. If you're interested in implementing an active word wall, there's a lot of fine-grained steps you could put into place, but some of the big things to think about are identify words that are essential for meeting the learning objectives and standards in the discipline. So think about, again, who are your students and what are your objectives? And then what words are really critical? Post words and have students help create word cards, graphics, definitions that can be available for everybody to use. And posting them the way Annie Kell did so that the knowledge is organized, the words are organized the same way you want students to organize their knowledge can be really powerful. The big thing with active word walls is that they're active. So you want to implement a daily routine of using them and using vocabulary journals to help students practice and record their learning. The more you have students look at, read, write, speak, use the words, the better. And so a daily exit ticket, a short writing prompt, a quick pair share discussion. Hey, look at our word wall. We just watched this video. What words from the word wall go best with the video we just watched and why? Turn to your partner and share. And so you're having students read the words, discuss the words, think about the words, and you've organized them in a way that they're supporting students, how they're organizing their knowledge of the words. One more instructional routine for you, concept sorts. They can be open or closed. An open concept sort is when you give students all the words and say, categorize them however you think they should be categorized. Be ready to justify your responses. This is an example of a closed sort. Thinking of a high school social studies classroom here. Group these words into two categories, war economy and peace economy. Be ready to justify your choices. So here, students have to work through these words, think about what they mean, and think about whether or not they're more closely aligned with a war economy or a peace economy. And some of these words could go in either. So it's not always cut and dry. There can be some really good debate and negotiation of meaning, and that actually helps students deepen their word knowledge. All right, I'm going to stop us there and just let you know if you're looking for more, I highly recommend Words Their Way, vocabulary for middle and secondary students. I was privileged to be an author on that along with Shane Templeton and his colleagues. And then another terrific vocabulary resource is my colleagues, Mike Graves and Dianna August and Jeanette Mancia Martinez, really with a focus on English language learners. And there's some great digital tools for you as well. All right, thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to talking through these ideas with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Townsend. That was very informative and interesting. We'll now begin the live Q&A portion of the session. So if you have any questions, please let us know in the chat. And to start things off, Dr. Townsend, you shared a few different instructional routines with us. Can you tell us about possible obstacles teachers might encounter when using these routines and how they might work through those obstacles?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Let's see, there's a little bit of an echo. Everybody, can you hear me okay, Gabrielle? Great. So, one of the things I think about when I think about instructional routines, and I prefer the word routine to strategy because I want to think about meaningful routines that I use on a regular basis that my students have opportunities to kind of build some automaticity with the procedures, and we can just jump right into that important language exploration. So I think about the word routine because I want to use good routines on a regular basis. And then any given routine is only as powerful as the objective it serves. So if my objective is asking students to kind of discreetly learn a list of words and not really apply them in their reading or writing or discussion, the routine we may lack engagement or may lack some of that deeper learning that I'm looking for. So I want to make sure that I have really solid learning objectives in place that then my vocabulary or academic language routines support. When a routine kind of falls flat or doesn't yield the deeper word learning I hope it would, it's usually a sign to me, oh, I got to go back and revisit what did this actually fit into? What was the ultimate objective? And it may be that I was asking students to practice with too many words at once. It may be that I didn't give them enough opportunities to connect to their background knowledge that they already had about words. It may be that I didn't give them enough opportunities to practice. So we know from Margaret McCowan and her colleagues' work that we're looking at about 12 exposures, 12 to start really building that ownership of words. So it might be that I had this great routine in place, but I needed to do it maybe once a week for a few weeks in a row and not just stop at the one time. So when I have those pitfalls, and I have them all the time when I'm teaching my undergrads, like, okay, wait a minute, we gotta revisit this. And then when I co-teach with teachers in high school classrooms, it's usually my objective wasn't solid enough. I need to revisit that, or they needed more opportunities to practice. And I was moving a little bit too fast if I was looking for that deep iceberg knowledge.
Thank you so much. And one more question. How should teachers get started with implementing some of the ideas you shared around morphology and academic words?
Absolutely. That morphology especially can be a little intimidating. Before I started studying morphology as a researcher, I was kind of intimidated by it. I don't think I had enough opportunities to learn about it either in my K-12 or my teacher education experiences. So a lot of it was learned. I learned it in the context of research. I think I just love the idea of word consciousness, that we all want to model that curiosity and interest in words. And that is, I think, the single most important ingredient for teachers to get started, is to say, oh, I teach these words every year. I never really thought about their word parts. Why don't I go look them up? And so I kind of modeled in the lecture, in the talk today, how to use Edym Online and the free dictionary to kind of dig into the histories of words and how they're related to other words. So even doing that once a week with a key concept that's coming up in a math class or a biology class, that's kind of the teachers being curious, modeling that word consciousness, and then bringing their new knowledge to their students and piquing their students' curiosity in words. So I think to get started, especially with morphology, it's just start with the words you're curious about, spend a few minutes here and there learning about them, bring that information to your students and give them some opportunities to discover words on their own as well. And then create a space on your word wall or in a vocabulary bank or vocabulary journal, anywhere. This can all be done digitally as well, where there's a list of common morphemes, and have students start paying attention to when they see those morphemes. It can also be really, really helpful for teachers to do this in teams, either in grade level teams or content area teams. If students are getting repeated exposures to meaningful morphemes across multiple classes, I did a study on this, actually. There was something called dosage effects, where when teachers were hitting similar morphemes across classes, the more teachers a student had who was doing that, the more morphological, more gains they made in morphology. And so when we can get on board as a group of teachers to give students lots of exposure and practice to meaningful morphemes, that can actually, exponential might be too strong of a word, but it absolutely increases the gains that students can make in their word knowledge. So coming together, looking at key terms across the course of a unit or a year, identifying some common morphemes, creating ways for students to have quick discussions about them, drawing their attention to them, morphology sorts, those kinds of things. Those are all very actionable and kind of simple ways to get started, that then, believe me, you just get, it's a snowball effect. You just get more and more excited about words. The word consciousness, it kind of begets itself. And so then you can kind of take off with it. There's some great approaches to morphology as well. Pete Bowers' work on structured word instruction, SWI. There's a nice program called Morpheme Magic. Those kind of give you more kind of ready to go templates and things to get started with. But I think word consciousness, just a little bit of curiosity, maybe a few times a week, is a really great way to get started.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. So I think not seeing any. Just thank you again. That was a wonderful presentation. I know I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how we can implement some of these strategies with NAEP vocabulary going forward.
Great. That's a terrific idea.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.